In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
Quiet Riot. Hello, and welcome to Quiet Riot Midnight Mass. I'm Andreou. This is a very short little reaction pod on the debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Let me begin with two declarations. First, while I will make every effort to give you an honest and unvarnished view, I cannot pretend that this is an objective view. The disgust I feel for Donald Trump is visceral. And I don't think anyone who has ever been the other, part of the out group, who has ever had stuff shouted at them in the street or who has ever been bullied at school could be objective. Trump is every guy telling you he'll be waiting after school, every guy taking an upskirt photo, every guy hanging out the car shouting abuse. When you recognize that, you recognize it with your gut, and there is no bypassing that feeling. So I won't pretend. Second, I struggle to understand much of the coverage. So I cannot promise that I somehow split the difference and present some kind of median view. I don't. I have watched and listened to so much coverage this week that I consider deficient. I have come to accept that maybe it is my view that is daft. Breathless stuff about how Harris is losing it and Trump is surging. On this, at least, I can give you the facts. Looking at the aggregate polling, Harris went into the convention 2.6 percentage points ahead. She's now 2.8 percentage points ahead. At her peak, she was 3.6 points ahead on 47.2%. Yes, that gap has closed, but Harris is still on 47.2%. And the one thing I have not heard mentioned anywhere is that in that period, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who commanded around 5% of the vote, dropped out of the race and endorsed Trump. He has managed to convert less than 1% of that RFK Jr. vote. That seems to me the last big gambit by the Trump-Vance camp, and it has largely failed. I look at Trump's 44-45%, and I can't see how they can hope to boost it from here on in. So on to the debate proper. The first thing that happened is that I think Kamala Harris surprised Trump by going over to him to shake his hand. He didn't seem to expect it. He thought that maybe if he didn't come to the middle of the podium, she wouldn't come to him, but she actually did corner him, extended her hand, looked him in the eye and shook his hand. And I think that was the first moment where we saw a sort of weakness that repeated itself throughout the 90 minutes. So what we saw throughout that 90 minutes is Kamala Harris looking at him and him refusing to look back. He looked forward and off to the side, but refused to make eye contact with her. I suspect he thinks that makes him look powerful and in command. The effect was actually the reverse. He looked quite weak. He looked quite scared of her. And that was set up in that initial handshake. Harris started quite nervous, I thought. She was quite shaky. It was obvious that the high stakes were getting to her. But as soon as they got onto the economy, I thought it was Trump that began to flounder a little bit. And I think that's a function of the sort of environment he's been campaigning in. He is so used to claiming he was the greatest, he made the greatest economy, everything was rosy, without any challenge. He was at a loss about how to counteract that. He came back to her on the economy with this quite strange statement.
She has no policy. Everything that she believed 3 years ago and 4 years ago is out the window. She's going to my philosophy now. In fact, I was going to send her a MAGA hat. She's gone to my philosophy. But if she ever got elected, she'd change it. And it will be the end of our country. She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well.
So she has no policies. She has taken his policies. He's going to send her a MAGA hat. Also, she's a Marxist because her father was a Marxist. I'm not sure those things go together. Her having no policies, his policies, and her father's policies. And it strikes me that we've become so accustomed to judging Trump by his own very low standards that we don't look for internal consistency in what he says. In any case, this was when Trump began to unravel about 10-15 minutes into the whole thing. The next subject that came up was the subject of reproductive rights. And this is when really Kamala Harris came into her own, assumed her full size, and began to properly kick his ass, I would say. Trump was asked why he has changed his position. He started going on about babies being executed after birth and was corrected repeatedly by the moderator. He claimed credit for Roe v. Wade because apparently undoing Roe v. Wade took the issue back to the states, allowing the states to vote on the issue of abortion, but then went on to criticize the states for voting liberally on the issue of abortion. Harris, in sharp contrast, spoke passionately about this. She put actual stories to him. She looked at him and said, this is what's going on with people out there. And he looked again ahead and slightly away, his lips pursed, his anger visible. His response was incoherent. It was basically that even if Harris won, she couldn't undo the damage because Republicans in Congress wouldn't support a national bill on reproductive rights. And that strikes me as a very, very strange defense.
The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. They don't want that.
Immigration and the situation at the border came next, and it was quite surprising how unprepared Trump was for this. The defense was perfectly predictable. Kamala Harris laid this at his feet. She said quite rightly that she had a bill that would ameliorate the situation at the border, that would put loads of extra border guards there, that was agreed with Republican representatives and senators, that Trump then killed. It was perfectly obvious she was going to bring this up. As obvious as it was that he was going to bring immigration up, which he did on many, many occasions throughout the debate, tacking it onto completely unrelated stuff. But he didn't have a response to that basic charge, that she came up with a solution and he killed it because, to quote what she said, he prefers to run on the problem instead of fixing the problem. Now, it was at this point that things really began to fall apart for Trump. And it was by mentioning his rallies that Harris first managed to really get under his skin, to really trigger him, by saying that people were leaving his rallies out of boredom. From this point onward, for almost the rest of the debate, Trump sounded out of control, angry, unhinged, incoherent. He was literally struggling to get the words out. It was at this point he started going on about people eating their pets, the FBI being a fraud, everyone lying about everything, his rallies are the biggest in history, etc. Harris was in full charge, really, for the rest of the debate.
What we have in the former president is someone who would prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And I'll tell you something, he's going to talk about immigration a lot tonight, even when it's not the subject that is being raised. And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, on that point, I want to get your response.
Well, I would like to respond.
Let me just ask, though, why did you try to kill that bill, and successfully so, that would have put thousands of additional agents and officers on the border?
First, let me respond as to the
Please.
rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back.
It wasn't a particularly clever trap. But then again, Trump is not a particularly clever man. He ran straight into it. And from this point onwards, Kamala Harris basically knew how to handle him. Prick his pride, pop the balloon of his vanity, and he responded every single time by basically confirming what she had said, that all he wants to talk about is himself, rather than the people's problems, rather than the nation. Every time she did that by saying that generals she speaks to in private consider him a disgrace, that foreign leaders laugh about him, that his rallies are boring, that he sounds incoherent, that he was the worst president, that he left a mess for them to clean up. And every time Trump took the bait, and instead of talking about what he was planning to do going forward, he defended his reputation looking backwards.
Well, first of all, I wasn't given $400 million. I wish I was. My father was a Brooklyn builder, Brooklyn, Queens, and a great father, and I learned a lot from him. But I was given a fraction of that, a tiny fraction, and I built it into many, many billions of dollars, many, many billions. And when people see it, they are even surprised. So we don't have to talk about that. She was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out. Wait a minute. I'm talking now. If you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar? She went out.
And this is something else that he did that I suspect his team would have been apoplectic about, because it would be something that they would have said to him over and over again. Whatever you do, don't do that. Don't shush her. Don't show that you're afraid of the points that she tries to make. I suspect they had showed him that video of her saying to someone else, "Excuse me, I'm talking now," to use defensively. And he used it offensively. At some point he said to her, "Quiet now." And for someone who is trying to court the female vote, that would have been a disaster.
Quiet, Riot.
For the rest of the debate, Trump was on the defensive. He was made to defend the Capitol insurrection, say that he had nothing to do with it, he was just there. He said, "I was asked to make a speech, and I made a speech," like he was this person with no agency that is told where to go and what to say. He was made to defend his comments on Charlottesville, fine people on both sides. He went back to denying that he lost the election. That's perhaps the most damaging thing, actually. And said that when he recently accepted he had lost the election, he did so only sarcastically. This drew, I think, the best line of the debate from Harris.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that. But we cannot afford to have a president of the United States who attempts, as he did in the past, to upend the will of the voters in a free and fair election.
The section on foreign policy that followed was a bin fire for Trump. He was incoherent on Ukraine, refused to say it is in the US's best interest for Ukraine to win, having been given plenty of opportunities to respond to that exact question. He said that it's in the US's interest to end the war. Harris rightly said that means he would just give up Ukraine, which we kind of knows what he would do. She also reminded him when he kept raising Joe Biden's foreign policy record. You're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me, another strong line. He allowed Harris to align herself with NATO, with her European allies, and when told that foreign leaders didn't think much of him, the only character witness he could bring up in support was Viktor Orban. On Afghanistan, again, Trump was made to defend his deal with the Taliban, actually invented the head of the Taliban called Abdul. The old adage goes, if you're explaining, you're losing. Well, Trump spent the entire foreign policy section of the debate explaining, and quite ineffectually. Then came the topic of race.
You recently said of Vice President Harris, quote, "I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black." I want to ask a bigger picture question here tonight. Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
I don't, and I don't care. I don't care what she is. I don't care. You make a big deal out of something, I couldn't care less. Whatever she wants to be is okay with me.
But those were your words, so I'm asking.
I don't know. I mean, all I can say is I read where she was not black, that she put out, and I'll say that. And then I read that she was black, and that's okay. Either one was okay with me. That's up to her. That's up to her.
Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
Honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people. You know, I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us.
Confronted with the most toxic comment you have made throughout the entire campaign, something you know has gone down incredibly badly with everyone on every side, how can you somehow manage to both deny that you said it and double down on it? Those are your words, the moderator said. I don't know. Were they?
And you saw Kamala Harris conduct herself with dignity. She laid out a clear vision forward, one that's an opportunity economy we keep talking about, ability to own a home, making sure prescription drugs are not too expensive, and tackling the real problems and doing it all with grace and dignity. And then on the other side, look, I don't know how others describe it. You saw a nearly 80-year-old angry narcissist continue to veer off into things that in any other setting might actually be funny. She talks about them. He talks about himself.
That was her running mate's assessment of the debate, and it's very hard to disagree with that. If the Democrats went into this having a strategy, it would have been this: to make Donald Trump say weird stuff, so they could come out and say, this guy has nothing to do with you. He has nothing to offer to you. And it's difficult to see how their best scenario wasn't fulfilled by this debate. Their final statements could not have been more contrasting. She looked in control, calm, welcoming, compassionate. He looked so angry. He was leaning forward and struggling to get the words out. My overall verdict, I think, would be that she won the debate hands down because she managed to get under his skin. She managed to trigger him repeatedly. This debate will have generated a multitude of strong clips for them to use in their campaigning, and Trump's main clip that will make the news is about immigrants eating cats. The CNN Snap poll would seem to confirm that. Harris came out 63 to 37% as having won the debate. Not only that, but she exceeded the panel's expectations. So the panel was 50-50 split in their expectation of who was going to win the debate. So 63-37, a 36-point gap, is a massive swing of 18 points from 50-50 to Harris. And what followed the debate was that most coveted endorsement of all, that of Taylor Swift for Harris. She wrote on her Instagram, and it is important that I read the whole thing because it is so eloquently expressed. Like many of you, I watched the debate tonight. If you haven't already, now's a great time to do your research on the issues at hand and the stances these candidates take on the topics that matter to you the most. As a voter, I make sure to watch and read everything I can about their proposed policies and plans for this country. Recently, I was made aware that AI of me falsely endorsing Donald Trump's presidential run was posted to his site. It really conjured up my fears around AI and the dangers of spreading misinformation. It brought me to the conclusion that I need to be very transparent about my actual plans for this election as a voter. The simplest way to combat misinformation is with the truth. I will be casting my vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the 2024 presidential election. I'm voting for Kamala Harris because she fights for the rights and causes I believe need a warrior to champion them. I think she's a steady-handed, gifted leader, and I believe we can accomplish so much more in this country if we are led by calm and not chaos. I was so heartened and impressed by her selection of running mate Tim Walz, who has been standing up for LGBTQ+ rights, IVF, and a woman's right to her own body for decades. I've done my research and I've made my choice. Your research is all yours to do and the choice is yours to make. I also want to say, especially to first-time voters, remember that in order to vote you have to be registered. I also find it's much easier to vote early. I'll link where to register and find early voting dates and info in my story. With love and hope, Taylor Swift, Childless Cat Lady.
Quiet Riot.
So did Kamala Harris look like a president? It is the one question we are always told matters in this sort of debate above any other. But it needs to be more specific than that. Did she look like a president to someone who is undecided? I don't claim to know the soul of a swing voter. I can more easily imagine the mindset that would make one a fervent Trump supporter than put myself in the shoes of someone who looks at these two people with an open mind and has any hesitation. So did she look like a president? I'm not sure. We associate so much of what makes a leader with masculinity and often toxic masculinity. She didn't look like a president because no president has ever looked like her. Did she look presidential? She looked calm, centered, optimistic, generous, and in control. Is that what people consider presidential? By Jove, I hope so. As Tim Walz concluded, she did her job, now you need to do yours. Thank you all so much for listening. If you appreciate our hard work, please log on to Ko-Fi, that's ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod, and support us with a one-off donation or a small monthly stipend. We will be discussing all of this much more in the full show that will be out tomorrow morning. Have a great day. Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreou and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canellu. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
So no answer on their offer for a second debate.
Again, the reason you do a second debate is if you lose, and they lost. And we looked at one poll, it was 92-7.
Yeah.
We looked at another one, 86-3.
Wow.
I mean, we have all of these results coming in, but I'll think about it, it's very quick.